for Energy and Environmental Policy at the Ministry of Economy, Trade, Industry of Japan. Very happy to have you here, Minister. We'll then follow that up with two 10-minute presentations, one from Richard Lowes, that's also going to be recording. He's with RAP. And then we're very excited to have Patrick Combet here. He's the Deputy General Manager of Environmental Research Center, Daikin Europe, and you're based in Brussels, I believe, right? Yeah, it's based in Brussels. So following that, we'll have a panel discussion, and then I'll introduce the panelists, or I'll have the panelists introduce themselves when we get to about the midway point. So I would like, if we can cue the first keynote from Ms. Haslam.
Hi everyone, I'm sorry not to be with you physically in Brazil today, for lots of reasons. However, I'm happy to confirm from here in London that the UK government remains resolutely committed to net zero. And for us to get there, one of the biggest challenges is changing the way we heat our homes. Currently, over 80% rely on gas. We also have an old, inefficient housing stock, requiring yet more fossil fuels to keep them warm. It means homes and buildings account for nearly 22% of the UK's greenhouse gas emissions. There's the economic side too. The energy price shock in recent years has affected every family and business in the UK. These are significant challenges which will require bold action by policymakers. The good news is that we believe we already have the main solutions to hand. We're clear that heat pumps, along with heat networks, will be the primary low-carbon technology over the next decade and play a key role in all pathways to net zero. The case is clear. They are 3 times more efficient than gas boilers. They can demonstrably be deployed at scale. Because they run on electricity, they'll cut emissions and work in tandem with other rapidly improving technologies like solar, battery storage, and smart tariffs. So, if the picture is so rosy, why don't we see them everywhere? The reality is that in many countries, including ours, heat pumps are still not always the most attractive option because of cost, or because they aren't as easy as a like-for-like fossil fuel replacement. And this is where we need collective effort, with governments and industry working to bring down costs in the supply chain, to speed up the consumer journey, to spread the message that heat pumps are already a reliable way to make your home cleaner, greener, and supported with the right tariffs and tech, cheaper to run too. That's why we have taken several steps. Almost doubling our main subsidy programme to £295 million, a market mechanism to give the boiler industry the certainty to invest, grants to build manufacturing capacity, upskilling thousands of installers, and promoting benefits and dispelling myths through our warm and fuzzy public campaign. This work is delivering results. A record number of heat pumps installed last year, 41% higher than the previous year, which itself was significantly higher than the year before. So the message from the UK is clear. Despite the challenges, heat pumps are not just the future, but with the right policies, with everyone pulling in the same direction, the here and now too. I want to end by thanking Daikin and the Clean Heat Forum, which provides such a great platform for building consensus and sharing ideas in this space. And I encourage anyone listening to please support their work. Thank you.
Excellent. Great message from Olivia, and I like the fact that she talked about what are the challenges and the barriers, but also the opportunities. The barriers are in how do we get over the mental gaps of adopting new innovations. What are also the supply chain issues? I'm sure, with these types of technologies, we're always going to be asking questions on what are the potential disruptions possibly coming from climate events in making our supply chains more resilient so we can get these technologies to the stage of implementation. It's my honor now to call our second keynote speaker, Shinichi Chiara, Director General. Please come to the stage. We're looking forward to your discourse here. Thank you. Arigato.
So hello, great to see you all. I'm Shinichi Kihara from Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry of Japan. It's my great pleasure to participate in this session on making heat pumps new normal. I can immediately see the role of the heat pump there, making everybody pleasant now. And I'm the energy policy guy, energy climate policy guy. So. Given the increasingly uncertain energy landscape today, I will say that the triple breakthrough of achieving decarbonization, economic growth, and energy security simultaneously is very important. We should not sacrifice one for the other. In this context, enhancing energy efficiency is critically important. It is one of the solutions to make that triple breakthrough happen. And heat pumps are the promising solution. We have the technology, it's ready to go. I'm pleased to present Japan's policies and perspectives on the heat pumps. Actually, in Japan, the heating and cooling solution, always people buy heat pump, air conditioners. It's different system compared to European American centralized heating system. In Japan, we always purchase something new when we move to new apartment or new housing. So, moving to the first slide, heat demand accounts for a significant share of energy consumption in both the industrial and residential sectors. So please go to the next slide. Yes, the left side is the industrial sector and the right side is the housing sector. And there's considerable potential for introduction of heat pumps. Next slide. Heat pumps not only improve energy efficiency, but also enable shift from gas to electricity, contributing to the transition to non-fossil energy. And Japan is accelerating the introduction of heat pumps through both large-scale budgetary support, incentives, and regulatory system. So pushing and pulling. The next slide. Since last year, Japan has introduced governmental support of over $5 billion for a 3 years period. This applies to 3 categories, including one is energy efficiency improvement across entire factories. This is for large-scale investment. Category 2 is fuel conversion, and 3 is the replacing of individual equipment through the support. And we encourage investment, including in small and medium-sized enterprise. Especially using a category 3. Next slide. In tandem with the support mechanism, regulatory frameworks are important, and we implement the unique Top Runner program. The Top Runner program set energy efficiency targets and target years based on the best technology of the time. The heat pump manufacturers and importers are required to meet these targets by the design targeted year. And this is a moving target, so several years pass, then there's a much higher standard as a new goal. So this moving target system is very effective as it stimulates technology innovation. All manufacturer has to develop something new every day. So in the case of the air conditioners, we have the record of gaining 30% energy efficiency improvement over the past 20 years. Next slide. And facing the rising energy prices, reducing electricity and fuel bill is crucial. We are promoting the replacement to highly efficient heat pump water heaters through the government support, and this has stimulated demand. And the demand also lead to the water heater manufacturer to expand their production line. Next slide. So we have witnessed a significant shift from traditional gas water heaters to highly efficient heat pump heaters. Today, the share of highly efficient model account for 52%, up from 9% 20 years ago. Installed number of highly efficient heat pumps water heaters has exceeded 10 million units. Next slide. And lastly, and furthermore, Japan is working closely with WBCSD, the World Business Council on Sustainable Development, to develop new emission accounting concept. We call it the avoided emission for energy efficient technology, including heat pumps. Avoided emission quantifies the positive impact of greenhouse gas emission reduction achieved by a certain solution compared to the baseline scenario without the solution. Using avoided emission as new metrics will allow companies and financiers to prioritize projects or investment with more reduction impact. So you can see the baseline is the conventional gas heating system. It emits a lot of CO2. If you change to heat pump, then obviously there's substantive emission reduction. But for example, for the manufacturer, the Daikin, they manufacture a lot of heat pumps, but the conventional scope 1, 2, 3 mechanism, the more the Daikin produce heat pumps, more activity. So the scope 1, 2 goes up. But that's not the value of Daikin. They are reducing the emission of the whole society, the whole economy. So this new metric of avoided emission tries to count that positive side, the value of the company. So WBCSD is now incorporating the avoided emission with the conventional greenhouse gas protocol, or you say scope 1, 2, 3 accounting system. And Japan supports the initiative so that the effectiveness of energy efficient technology is properly evaluated worldwide. We need an international standard for this. So, in summary, heat pumps are promising and proven technology, and there is more to be done by the government and industries to achieve triple breakthrough. International collaboration is crucial, and I truly hope the opportunity like this session will facilitate understanding and lead to further deployment of heat pump technologies and contribute to the secure and sustainable energy future of the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, General Director. Whoops. Thank you for your points on that. Very fascinating to look about this topic of avoided emissions. Another way for us to look at decarbonization. I'm looking forward then as we talk more on the panel. I'd like now to call to the video. We're going to move now to our first of two presentations. We'll be hearing from Richard Lowes from RMP. He's going to be speaking about the potential of CO2 emissions reduction through heat pumps and strategies required for widespread adoption of this technology. So if we can cue the video.
Hello. This is a presentation for the Clean Heat Forum's event with Daikin at COP30 in Belém. The Clean Heat Forum was created at COP26 in Glasgow, an initiative by the UK government and the Scottish government, and the Secretariat is run by the Regulatory Assistance Project, RAP, and E3G. My name is Duncan Gibb, Senior Advisor at RAP. We know that there is still a great need to decarbonize heating in buildings. In terms of energy consumption for heating in buildings, renewables still meet a small share of building heat, around 16%, with the most of this taken by modern bioenergy. However, a rising share is from ambient heat from heat pumps as they're being deployed around the world. As the share of ambient heat from heat pumps is rising in energy consumption, we know that heat pumps are a key building technology for heat decarbonization. The IEA found that heat pumps globally have the potential to reduce CO2 emissions by at least 500 million tons, roughly equivalent to Canada's emissions in 2021. You can see this in the chart. Even under the announced policy scenario from several years ago, heat pumps go a long way towards reducing emissions in buildings. The Clean Heat Forum plays a role in this by trying to accelerate the decarbonization of buildings by working with national governments, NGOs, and industry. As mentioned, it was created at 2021 at COP26 in Glasgow. We work on sustainable heating practices and trying to share best practice policy among our members. We focus on making the heat transition affordable and making sure that governments have adequate support to meet a rapid and equitable shift to clean heating. This year, in the context of heat pumps, the Clean Heat Forum has had two notable outputs that I would like to discuss briefly today. The first is a policy brief on how to make electricity cheaper around the world. This is coming soon in the weeks following COP. At the end of October, beginning of November, the Clean Heat Forum and RAP published the Clean Heat Policy Tracker, the 2025 edition. And I'd like to walk through some of the results from this study and talk about how governments are approaching heat decarbonization around the world. Let's begin by speaking about energy prices. What we know, what we see in trend lines is that low price ratios tend to lead towards more electrification. A price ratio in this context is the ratio of the electricity price to the price of the fossil fuels used for heating. That could be the ratio of electricity to natural gas, the ratio of electricity to heating oil. It depends on the region concerned. What we see in the US and Canada is that as the price ratio decreases, so that's going from top to bottom, from high to low on the y-axis, we see a greater share of homes with electricity as a main heating fuel. So that's going from left to right on the x-axis. In the other chart, on the right part of the slide, in Europe, we see a similar trend where as the price ratio goes from high in the United Kingdom to low in Denmark, we see a greater market share of heat pumps than in other countries. You notice the Netherlands here is a bit of an outlier because the Netherlands has taken strides to greatly reduce its price ratio to boost the heat pump market, which has had good results in recent years. But you can see that's why it's a bit of an outlier in terms of this trend. However, in many countries, the trend holds that the lower the price ratio of electricity to gas, the higher the market share of heat pumps. This can also be represented in a map. When we look at the price ratios across Europe, again, we can set some boundaries. So we say a good price ratio for electrification is around 2.5, because you know that if your coefficient of performance is around 3 or 3.5, which could be considered standard performance in these European conditions, we know that the heat pump will be a winner on running costs if the price ratio is less than 2.5 almost all the time. Once you get so those are the countries in blue. Once you get between 2.5 and 3.5, it starts to become a little bit less certain whether your heat pump will deliver cost savings. And once you get up to more than 3.5 of an average price, that starts to be where it would potentially be more expensive to run the heat pump. There are ways around this, such as using dynamic tariffs to make sure you're running the heat pump at times of low electricity prices. But of course, the best way forward is to simply reduce the prices of electricity overall, especially relative to gas. For this report on energy prices, we also looked at Chinese provinces, and we saw that there's a great range of electricity and gas prices, but generally the price ratios tend to be very, very low. So you can see on this chart, the highest one is around 3.1, where we also see price ratios, many of which are below 2, certainly below 2.5, almost all of them, with the exception of 3. Are above 2.5. So there's a strong economic case for electrification in China. That concludes our discussion on prices, and now I'd like to talk a little bit about policy frameworks and work we've done in the Clean Heat Forum on tracking policy frameworks. We did an review this year of 17 countries, about half of which are in Europe. We also covered Canada and China, the United States. in South Korea, and Jordan, in terms of countries outside of Europe. And we tried to see comprehensively which policies are the most common in which countries. What strategies are governments taking to decarbonize their heating, and what is the best practice in these policies? So to do so, we did an overview that looks at the general trends. We looked at policy fact sheets. So you can see on the right side here, we grouped them into 5 categories: overall policy framework, regulatory policy, financial support policies, pricing reforms, and communications. And we tried to highlight some of the best practices from the 17 countries we reviewed, so that any country that's looking to dive into heat decarbonization, they can turn to this policy tracker to see some of the best practices from around the world. So when we look at the results of our survey, we find that subsidies are the most common policy lever. Indeed, in almost all countries, we see some sort of subsidy for clean heating in place, whether it be heat pumps or district heating, or different technologies which don't feature here but can be understood as being part of the clean heat portfolio. Many countries also have communications campaigns that try to improve public understanding or track heat decarbonization publicly. Yet, as we go down the list, we see that we're lacking comprehensive frameworks for heat decarbonization. So not a lot of clear and binding targets for fossil fuel phase out or for heat pumps, lack of clarity on heat decarbonization governance, a sort of national heat planning. It's really mainly dominated by subsidies. So when we look at this in terms of the 5 categories I mentioned earlier, we can see that financial support, as mentioned, is by far the most common. So we see governments are keen to provide these incentives to try to bring down the upfront cost of the technology, but they're lacking the strong regulations to make sure the technologies are being taken up, or the sort of frameworks and long-term vision that can guide the sector, that can guide investments, that can reinforce the industry, that can encourage the households to make these sort of investments. And we don't see much action on pricing reforms either. So as mentioned previously, we have a lot of very expensive electricity in different countries around the world. We have gas and fossil fuels that remain cheaper. The price ratios are not good. In many cases, carbon pricing is not in place. And these are kind of long-term strategic mistakes that countries will need to rectify if they want to see a quicker decarbonization of heating. So to conclude, we know that heat pumps are the key heat decarbonization technology in buildings. They will be a heavy lifter in terms of getting us off fossil fuels and how we heat our buildings. The approach by countries is largely still to spend money to provide incentives and let the industry figure out the rest. We don't think that this is a great approach because it's lacking some of the long-term vision and structural support that's needed for the industry to have confidence in its investments, for households to be encouraged to make their own investments and transition their own heating systems from fossil fuels to heat pumps. So we know that comprehensive approaches are key for achieving this goal, and we would encourage all countries to look at their policy frameworks, to compare them to the Clean Heat Policy Tracker, and to use some of the best practices we've highlighted there to make sure that their policy framework is complete and is on track for getting their country off fossil fuels for heating. Thank you very much for your time.
Excellent. We appreciate that intervention. And at this point, I'd like to transition now to our panel. I'd love to have our 3 panelists come to the stage. We'll have Patrick, Yves Laurent, and Luc come up to the stage, and then we'll do a round of introductions, start the conversation, and I think we just need one more mic. Oh, I'm sorry. Pardon me. My bad. My mistake. My bad. I jumped a little ahead. Patrick Hombé will do the second presentation. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Alexander. Yeah, I'm trying to be mindful of timing, so I will not spend too much time on the introduction. Can we go to the first slides, please? So I will try to give you some data, especially on the European market, to give an overview, and maybe we can use that in the panel discussion to just dive in a little bit deeper. So I have some data on actually market in evolutions, the technologies, the backgrounds of why these are there, future outlook, and I will finish with some conclusions to then lead into the panel. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah, go on. Okay. So, as we all know, Europe is often referred to as the old continent. And if you go to the next slide, we can actually see why that probably also is the case within the building environment. Next slide. Okay, so we have about a range of population that is growing, a historical number of residential buildings that is growing. So in the 1990s, 1980s actually, we only had about 90 million residential dwellings, whereas by 2025 we have almost 250 million residential dwellings. These are separate houses, apartments, really the total overview. Mainly due to, okay, population growth is one thing, urbanization is an important factor to that, and not to forget the smaller households are becoming more and more popular. One-person households, two-person households, whereas before, in the 1970s and 1980s, people were living 5, 6, 8 people all together. This is really not the case anymore. This translates into a very old building stock. So you could see that mostly, almost 50% and more of our buildings in Europe are dating before the 1980s. Now, to be honest, most of these buildings along the lifetime have had some kind of renovation, otherwise they wouldn't be there anymore. But nevertheless, it is an old building stock, especially if you see that post-2010 only represents 10% of our building stock. So we will have to do mostly work on the renovation. Next slide. Again, referring to what is happening, over the years we do see a gradual evolution in the type of heating systems that are being used. If you look again from the 1980s onwards, we can see that pretty much gas is remaining more or less stable. It goes up a little bit, goes down a little bit, but the tendency overall is stable, whereas heat pumps are growing, but are mainly replacing the high carbon intensive fuels like coal stoves and oil heating. We are not yet tackling very much the existing stock of gas boilers. And that translates into these numbers. We have about 100 million gas boilers running in Europe at this time of being, and about 20 million heat pumps. Now these heat pumps are air-to-water heat pumps, air-to-air heat pumps, mostly used for heating. So that's the combination of those two numbers. Still about 3 to 5 million biomass boilers, but altogether the challenge remains in how do we get, let me call it, rid of the stock of mostly old gas boilers. This is our main challenge. Next slide. So let's look at the technologies and the tendencies that we actually see happening today. Next slide. So we have the traditional heating systems, which nowadays indeed are mostly condensing boilers. And as a matter of fact, within Europe, you hardly can sell non-condensing boilers anymore due to legislation. We have biomass boilers. We have some, but small, level of combined heat and power units. And this, of course, has an immediate impact on the scrutiny towards these technologies and how can we achieve these predominant technologies to become more carbon neutral. There is a way forward, is indeed that some of these systems in time could be relying on cleaner fuels, but this is a tendency which is very long term and we really don't see too much happening at this present time. Next slide is then the evolution. So we do indeed see a shift towards more sustainable heating. We are seeing gradually a shift from boilers to sustainable heatings and heat pumps, but it goes very slow. And this is the main challenge we are facing. Europe has the climate targets, and again already this week here at Belém, the EU Commissioner actually confirmed that these targets are in place, remain in place, and are not to be discussed. So this is a very clear message that Europe remains committed, but there are also economic and market factors that we need to address. Was already highlighted before by the person from RAP. We have problems with gas prices, electricity ratios, which are not always in favor of moving to the right direction. And this is indeed this gap between electricity and gas
which is sometimes, and most of the cases, creating one of the bottlenecks. We'll come back to that later. An interesting factor that we do see happening, was also highlighted in the previous presentation, is the move towards more smart systems. Even if the gas to electricity price as such is not interesting, if you have a smart tariff, if you can use your solar panels, if you can use your batteries, you can have an integrated system that, despite all of that, can still be a economical, viable solution for the private end user. Next slide. So indeed, we do gradually see a boiler market decline. We do see over the last couple of years a decline of 4 to 6% of boilers on a yearly basis, which is okay, but it's too slow. So the call is really towards stronger interventions by governments to really push more towards its globalization or the electrification of heat. We do see a small but relevant move towards electric boilers, which also we need to take care of, and I'll come back to that at the end of my presentation. That if the electricity price as such at the end of the day becomes too low, people also are not interested to go to efficient solutions anymore, because it's not cost effective enough to invest in an efficient system if the electricity price is too low. And we have data on that later on. Next slide. Then let's look at heat pumps. So as said often before already during today's, the heat pumps are on the growth. We do see a market growth. However, it's not going fast enough, and we've seen major setbacks over the last years. The data that comes later on will actually prove that. We do need further investments, and in the Europe area, most manufacturers have committed immense investments in building up the capacity. So it's not about production capacity, not at all. It's really about rolling out and creating the market, which is now at stake. Next slide. Let's also look at air-to-air heat pumps. Often a sector which definitely in Europe, probably not here in Brazil, but definitely in Europe, is often forgotten as a way forward. We do see coming up more and more also in Europe the need for cooling, hence the combination between heating and cooling systems together. It will always remain impossible for a boiler to cool. So it's always a discussion that if you do go for a heat pump, you have the two systems at the same time. And at that time, really, the air-to-air heat pumps are becoming a crucial factor in actually making this happen, combined with advanced technologies, introduction of inverters, the introduction of VRF systems, which do allow a bigger scale-up of air-to-air as a way of heating and then also cooling our buildings. Next slide. So yes, cooling demand increase is there. We do see more and more longer summers. We have the effect of urbanization and the heat islands. This was also discussed already here at COP with Beat the Heat. It's one of these elements that is definitely in there. Overall, the HVAC market is growing, and we see a move towards more efficient cooling systems. Next slide. Now let's look at the background and the future outlook of what we can see. Next. This is not coming through very clearly, I'm afraid. This is basically showing the efficiency levels between the different systems, and it's putting it very clear that indeed there is no discussion about the fact that any heat pump at all, is at least 2.5 to 3 times as efficient as a boiler. The more you go up the scale, indeed you can go to heat pumps that are 4.5, 5 times more efficient, but probably in most of the cases you don't have to go to that level to make it economically feasible. So what we are saying is try to go for a system that is affordable to make sure that the rollout goes fast enough. Next slide. So if we look at cost, and this is often the elephant in the room, yes, indeed, heat pumps are more expensive. There is no two ways about that. So if we look at the different systems, we can see a gas boiler in Europe going somewhere between 2.5 and 5.5 euro. That's an awful big spread. It's also to do with the countries. There's a big difference in pricing by country. If you look at, and that's what we say, an air-to-water heat pump traditionally will be about 2.5 to 4 times more expensive as a gas boiler. The main point there is that we are saying that air-to-air can provide a cost-effective solution in quite a number of cases, and especially if we are looking at cooling. So towards the southern part of Europe, we really believe air-to-air in combination with cooling can provide a solution. What we are seeing more and more, and potentially even more important, is what we call mixed systems. We do see mixed systems coming into the market where air-to-air units are providing at the same time air conditioning, cooling, but are also providing hot water. And it's these systems that we do see gradually picking up more and more pace in the market. It can be used in retrofits, whereas we do see air-to-water heat pumps quite often are used towards new buildings because of the infrastructure that are needed and so on. Whereas gas boilers traditionally remain mostly used in existing buildings. And again, I said before, this is the main target of decarbonization over the next 5 to 10 years. Next slide. So if we do make a projection, and this is based on historical baseline of the market and the market evolution, and then projecting towards 2030, taking the net zero carbon targets of the European Union. So from that point of view, you could see that this is probably the best case scenario from a decarbonization point of view. Where we do see that gradually over time, indeed, these boilers are going down. We are getting into a situation towards the end of the decade where heat pumps will gradually overtake across Europe the sale of boilers. In fact, in some countries today that is the case. For the first time in Germany this year, there are more heat pumps being sold than boilers. So it is starting to happen. However, we do have to take care of these ups and downs in the market. That's what we see here. It's nice to show a growing and a continuously growing tendency. Nevertheless, we have to make sure that these spikes that we had during the 2021-2022 period, where suddenly there was a boom, everybody thought it's happening, we are on track, and finally, because of gas prices going back down again, the market collapses. And yes, now we are approximately 3.5 to 5 years behind the original intention of the European Union. That's also recognized. It was also said with so many words earlier this week by the European Commissioner in Belém, saying that yes, decarbonization of domestic heat is one of the sectors which is falling behind the targets. So next slide, please. Yeah, I will need to finish up. Let's skip this. Next slide. So just as a global perspective, roughly speaking, we see the same tendencies in the US with quite some time difference, but we see the same tendencies where gradually over time heat pumps are overtaking gas furnaces. And just one remark to make, indeed, if electricity price becomes too low, which is here the case in the UK and especially then in California, where the electricity prices are too low, you see that basically the move towards more efficient electric water heaters is keeping the main track, and the move towards heat pumps there is slowing down because simply speaking the people cannot afford it and they don't see the benefit. Next slide, just to conclude. So as a conclusion, we do see the market transformation. We have an enormous potential to decarbonize the current building stock. New builds are basically on track. Regulation is there and we do build more efficient and carbon neutral buildings. There are policy asks, and I think we will go back to that during the panel discussion, but clearly integrated solutions and different types of heat pumps are the way forward. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Patrick, I think you can just stay on stage, right? And now we move to our panel. So Yves Laurent, I'll ask you to come to the stage, and also Luc Menzel as well. And I will share this mic with you, gentlemen. And then I'll move over there. Right. So I'd like to kick off the panel with maybe just we have a little bit of idea of how Patrick is working in this space, and I'll invite Yves Laurent to talk about how he's working in the decarbonization space, and then we'll do the same with Luc, just to sort of set the stage, and then we'll start off with some questions. So Yves Laurent, just a quick update on...
What do I do or the situation in France regarding heat pumps? What do you want to do?
I would prefer if you just set the stage a little bit of your activities in the cooling space.
Okay. So, well, hello, I'm Yves Laurent Sapoval. I'm part of the administration that is taking care of housing, construction, and urban development. I'm more specifically in charge of international affairs. But yeah, that's what we do in terms of, and also renovation, and of course this question of heating and cooling systems.
Excellent, thank you. I think one thing that's going to be really interesting from Yves Laurent's perspective is you're also a trained architect as well, I understand, right?
Yeah,
So-
I was going to come back to that afterwards. If you
Okay,
can.
great. There'll be some great insights there. Luke, off to you.
So my name is Luke Menzel. I'm CEO of the Energy Efficiency Council in Australia. So the Energy Efficiency Council is the peak industry body for efficiency, electrification and energy flexibility. We're active in every part of the economy, including in homes, but also commercial buildings, food processing, manufacturing, resources and agriculture. And we have a whole range of companies that are members of our council. Everyone, Dakin, leading member of the Energy Efficiency Council, along with Siemens and Schneider Electric, Stiebel Eltron, a big brand in Europe in terms of the heat pump hot water system space, right down to 2 or 3 person consultancies. And so we're always thinking about the role of electrification as a driver of decarbonisation, but also making sure that we're doing electrification, as you said, in a way that works on the grid and delivers those affordability outcomes for households.
Excellent. Thank you, Luke. I'd like to pose the first question, starting with Yves Laurent and then to Patrick. Patrick, you started to talk a little bit about the regulatory frameworks and the policy mechanisms. So maybe Yves Laurent, you can kick us off and then we can have Patrick follow up. But what are the policy mechanisms or programs that you see that have been like the most effective in accelerating the adoption of heat pumps in your sector or in your region?
I would say in France we have an inclusive policy aiming, in the meantime, the industrial capacity, the skills development, regulation, and financial incentives. So in terms of heat pumps, I think we are beating our objectives. I have the numbers, so it's very small, and I just. Bearing in mind that the heating system in France is already electrified, and that we have a system of electricity production that is, of course, widely decarbonized. So it's, this is a characteristic of France, I guess. Yes, we are. So we were aiming a million French heat pump, of course, in 2027. I think that we are really getting there faster than what we thought. I won't go too far into the industrial policy and things like that, which are, of course, all the value chain, the need to train people to etc. But we have that, but I think it's not the added value that I can bring here. So that we have also a regulation that is favorizing the installation of the decarbonization of the heating and cooling. Is principally heating at the moment in France, and and we have an environmental regulation for buildings that is in carbon life cycle assessment in carbon, and this is pushing very much the decarbonization, of course, of the source and the use of heat pump, and that pushes the market very, very strongly. In the meantime, we have financial incentives that can go from, depending on the revenues of the households, that can go from 2,000 euros to 9,000 euros approximately. So yes, the market is very much growing. After that, the complexity of the question is a little bit different, and I think we still need to make the case for several reasons. One of them being that water to water. The complexity. The cost of installation for us, as we have ancient buildings with ancient emitters, small emitters that are adapted to 70 degrees water or 80 degrees water. It's not. We need to adapt both the building, the emitters, and the source, which is when at the end of the day, when you say a heat pump is between 3,000 and 13,000 euros, this is the heat pump, and then you have all the rest to do, potentially insulation. And I think it's not clear for people if they just change the source, it's going to be more effective, even more specifically cost effective. So this is something that has still to be secured in some way, because for, as you said, for the new buildings it's clear. For the big renovations, I think the global renovation, it is clear, because you can have how do you call that, plancher chauffant,
The
heating floor,
floors, yeah.
and so you have big emitters, and you can lower the temperature in a reasonable way. But if you keep the house and all the building as it was before, it is not clear that you will gain something, and I mean financially on the long run. So that's that's, to me, that's the main obstacle by now to the installation of heat pumps.
Okay. I think there's a great relevance in your response. As we all know,
This is said as an architect, as you said, because you tend to see you tend to see not
No.
only the technology, but also the overall
The design.
the overall building.
yeah, I mean, this is also talking about how do we integrate the built environment to this, and how do we design for this in the future. But what I liked about your response is you're talking about what are the exterior factors that are creating demand, and we keep hearing this idea about what is driving demand in innovation, what is driving demand in climate finance or in resilience. Patrick, maybe a quick response to policy mechanisms that you're seeing, and then we'll hand it to Luke.
2 points, I think, maybe controversial would be that it's about consistency. I think we've seen across Europe that it doesn't even matter the level of the subsidies, it's about whether there is a consistency in the approach. We've seen markets where one year you have a certain subsidy, the next year it's going down, and then the market and the end users especially, they don't know anymore, and finally nothing happens. It's not just that heat pumps don't happen, but total renovation stops. Typical example there, Italy, where at some point we had a huge boom, and finally it just came to a complete halt. Complete opposite, and was highlighted by the first intervention today. The UK, after a long time, is finally getting to terms with decarbonisation. They've taken it very seriously. They are still the biggest boiler market in Europe, but it's also the fastest growing heat pump market now. Why? Because they have policies in place which have been confirmed over several cabinets and are now prolonged into 2028, 2029. So end users know what to do. And we've seen that this is the main initial trigger. Once that is done, absolutely agree with what you are saying there, is that you need to have companies that indeed look further than just let's throw in a heat pump and let's do this. Then you can get into bad situations. That's part of our responsibility as manufacturers to provide training. So that's where then the double edge is coming. We need to make sure that the interventions are done in a proper way, so that finally the end user has his correct experience.
Thank you, Patrick. Luke, let's get the perspective from your organization. You're the peak organization of many different energy efficiency groups in Australia. What does the policy framework look like, or what are the incentives that Australia is either putting into place or will put into place, and how do you see that driving demand?
So many of the same issues that have been discussed so far do manifest themselves in Australia, but there's also a couple of case studies I could share which are a little bit bleeding edge, I think, from an international perspective. We've got incentive programs, minimum standards incredibly important. We have the same workforce challenges and kind of engaging consumers on the journey. One thing that we do have that is makes it much easier than in Europe is you're better off financially electrifying your home, because we don't have that hit in terms of the differential between gas and electricity. So if you electrify your home, you're somewhere between $1,000, $2,000 Australian better off from year one. And so that makes it much easier to drive a conversation around electrification. But the thing that's interesting in Australia is a lot of this policy gets driven at the state level. So we have 6 states and 2 main territories. That's where a lot of the regulation and incentive programs sit. And in 2 of those jurisdictions, really important regulatory interventions and signals have been put into place. In the Australian Capital Territory, which is a little bit like Washington DC, that's where Canberra is. It's a small self-governed territory, quite progressive, lots of public servants, a very well-informed electorate. They have announced that they will be phasing out the reticulated gas network in 2045. And so there's been a clear signal put out to the market that actually there's not going to be a gas network to plug your equipment into in about 20 years. So while they've got incentive programs, while they've obviously got information that's being provided to the public, just that clear articulation of the direction of travel is incredibly powerful, because why would you put a piece of gas equipment in when you know that the network's going away? And that just stating that costs no money. It's just providing clarity into the market, so that's very important. So I think that's a really interesting thing for us to reflect on, and how we can leverage that sort of clear guidance from government in terms of like the infrastructure that's going to be available as we transition to net zero to just drive decision making. The other interesting case study from Australia I can share is that in Victoria, where I live, which is the second most populous state at the bottom of the country, we have a few issues around gas in Victoria. We have very ambitious climate targets. Again, it's a relatively progressive government down there. But the other thing that's focusing the mind of the Victorian government is that it's running out of gas. So there's quite significant gas fields in the sea basin south of Victoria. They've been providing very significant amounts of gas into the Victorian market. About 70-75% of homes are connected to the reticulated gas network and providing both space heating and hot water heating. The fact that we're running out of gas is focusing the mind of the Victorian government about how they transition, particularly the housing stock, away from gas in a timely fashion, because the alternatives are very impalatable, like potentially putting in gas import terminals to ship gas into Victoria to heat hot water in homes and to heat the air in homes. Ridiculously inefficient, right? And so they get it. They get that there's a trajectory towards electrification, but what they're doing is pretty straightforward. Yes, they've got incentive programs. Yes, they're providing information in the market. In 2027, you will not be allowed to put in a gas hot water system when the one that you've got reaches end of life. And so that's a very simple signal in the market. You're leveraging that replacement moment. The consumer is already making a decision to invest in a new piece of equipment. There's incentives in place to cover off the differential between, the cheaper gas boiler, the traditionally cheaper gas boiler, and the more expensive heat pump. But I mean, that's the most powerful thing we can do to drive demand, is just to kind of take the 20th century technology off the table.
Thank you, Luke. A couple of just brief takeaways. Like, we're setting up a conversation about demand. We're talking about value propositions here. We're talking about incentives. I want to teleport us 5 to 10 years into the future and see where we are. So, Patrick, looking at what is needed, what are the barriers? This will be our final question. We'll do like a lightning round. Where do you see these innovations in 5 to 10 years?
Well, what we see happening already, and I think that can only continue, is integration of systems, integration of systems in the house, integration of the system with the grid, so that the heat pump and the house actually become a dynamic participant in the grid, which not only make it interesting for the user because he will have a cost-effective solution, but it will also provide interesting situations for the grid operators to actually be able to operate their grid efficiently as well.
Yves Laurent, your reaction. Teleport us 5 to 10 years in the future. Where do you see us going?
I'm not very good at this exercise. I'm just
the mind of the architect.
No, really, because I think, I remember when we created Global ABC 10 years ago, there was no the question of, for example, these data centers was not
exactly.
the question. So, so the world is changing very fast. No. Anyway, no, I think what we see in France, at least, is that the growing demand for cooling is important.
Yep.
And this is affecting the value of real estate. So it might be, I mean, this might be a driver in this way, because I think there's no really alternative to produce, to be able to use the same source and produce both heating and cooling. So that would be my
future scenario.
Yeah.
Thank you, Yves, merci. Luke, 5 to 10 years, where are you in Australia on that?
So in a couple of weeks, the Energy Efficiency Council is going to be releasing our market acceleration plan, because the direction of travel is clear. We just need to move quicker. And it always comes back to what our emissions reduction aspirations are. And in an Australian context, we've just submitted our 2035 NDC. So what we've done is actually looked at what it would take for the housing sector to make a contribution to that. And what it means is electrifying about 2.4 million homes in the next 10 years. So just being very clear on the metric, heat pumps are important, the technology is important, but there's this overarching framework, and that makes it a lot easier to communicate to policymakers to say, this is a piece of the jigsaw puzzle, you know, we need to get this piece right, and it'll make that overarching task that we've got as a nation that much easier.
Thank you, Luke. So we've come to the end. If anyone has questions or answers, questions to the panelists, suggest that we do those as sidebar conversations. But I'd like to thank Patrick, Yves Laurent, and Luc for their great insights, and also our presenters as well. Thank you for your attention, and wish you a best rest of COP, and good afternoon. Thanks again.